I'm Monica Rivers, 34, and I built a quiet, steady life for myself, no shortcuts, no handouts. For years, I gave everything to my family. Covered bills, smoothed over tension, made excuses when they crossed the line. But when my sister humiliated my partner in front of the entire family, mocked him, laughed at him, I made a decision that changed everything. Have you ever given your all to someone, only to be dismissed like you didn't matter? If you have, share your story in the comments. This space is for you. Before I tell you exactly what happened, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to draw a line and choose yourself, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about reclaiming your voice and walking away with dignity. What happened next, you won't believe. I used to think there was something noble about keeping the peace, about letting things go. That was the role I played in my family, and I played it well, quiet, dependable, always smoothing things over when tension crept in. We grew up in a house where appearances mattered more than truth. My parents weren't cruel, but they were obsessed with image. We weren't wealthy, not really, but they worked hard to look like we were. My mom curated every holiday card like it was a magazine cover, and my dad talked more about golf scores than feelings. Claire, my younger sister by 2 years, thrived in that world. She learned early how to play the part, and people loved her for it. Claire had the kind of charm that made people lean in when she spoke. Teachers adored her. Coaches fought to have her on their teams. Even as a teenager, she had a way of making everyone feel like she was letting them into some exclusive inner circle. And to her credit, she was smart, polished, and knew how to get what she wanted. I was different, quieter, more observant. I didn't need to be the center of attention. I was the one who remembered people's birthdays, who stayed up editing college essays, who drove Claire home from parties when she'd had too much and didn't want our parents to know. When Claire got engaged the first time, yes, the first, I planned her entire bridal shower. I designed the invitations, baked the cake, even paid the deposit for the venue when she couldn't cover it. She thanked me in a quick text, then forgot to mention me in her speech. I brushed it off. Then, a year later, when our dad lost a chunk of his retirement savings in a bad investment, I quietly picked up their mortgage for 6 months. I never told Claire. I figured it would embarrass Dad, and I didn't want to add tension. I just wanted to help. That's what I believed love was supposed to look like, showing up, again and again, without keeping score. Claire never asked about my life unless it related to hers. She'd text if she needed a recommendation, or a connection, or a dress borrowed, but she rarely asked how I was doing. And still, I showed up. I thought that's just what being a sister meant. When I met Jordan, everything shifted. It wasn't a grand, sweeping love story. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming. He was quiet, like me, more comfortable asking questions than talking about himself. He told me he worked in logistics, which I later learned meant managing high-level supply chain operations for the military. But at that party, he just said, "I move stuff around. Keep things running." I liked that, the lack of flash, the steadiness. We went for coffee a week later, then lunch, then dinner. Jordan didn't play games. He texted when he said he would. He remembered things I told him, even the small stuff, like how I always check expiration dates on milk obsessively, or that I hated when people talk over waiters. It took a few months before I told my family about him, not because I was hiding him, but because I knew how they'd react. Claire especially. When she finally met him, she smiled wide, polite, but her eyes didn't match. "This is the guy," she said afterward. "He seems nice, just not what I pictured for you." "What did you picture?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know, someone a little more ambitious." I didn't respond. There wasn't a point. Claire had a very specific image of what success looked like, and Jordan didn't fit it. He drove an old Ford pickup, grew up in a trailer park in Mississippi, didn't have a trust fund or a finance job or a framed degree on the wall. What he did have was discipline, integrity, and a calmness that put me at ease in a way no one ever had. He never boasted about his job, never brought up his rank or titles unless someone directly asked. He liked fixing things, cars, leaky pipes, broken fences. He helped my neighbor carry furniture into her apartment one weekend just because he saw her struggling. But to Claire, none of that counted. At a family barbecue, she asked him if he'd ever thought about doing something more. He said, I like what I do." She nodded like he'd just confirmed her worst fears. Still, Jordan never complained, not once. He knew what they thought of him, even if they didn't say it outright. And I think he decided, early on, not to defend himself. He didn't need their approval. He just wanted to be there for me. Looking back, I realize how much I tried to protect him from their judgment. I'd preemptively explain things, soften their comments, change the subject when Claire got snide. But that only made it worse. I was shielding everyone, him from their cruelty, them from the truth, and myself from the growing realization that no matter how much I gave, they weren't going to meet me halfway. Still, I kept trying, because it's hard to unlearn that instinct. Hard to admit that the people you love might not respect you, or the life you've chosen. We dated for over a year before things finally broke open, before the moment that forced everything into the light. Before Jordan walked back into that house and said exactly what needed to be said. But up until then, I still believed I could keep everyone happy. That I could hold the peace together with silence. That maybe eventually they'd see what I saw. They didn't. And when it all came crashing down, it happened fast. But not before I gave them one last chance. The first time Claire corrected Jordan, we were in her kitchen, helping set up for Mom's birthday brunch. He made a joke about some online entrepreneur who flipped furniture for a living, and Claire, without missing a beat, said, "You mean entrepreneur, not entrepreneur." Jordan just nodded and kept slicing strawberries. I laughed awkwardly, hoping she'd take the hint and drop it. She didn't. The next week, when I told her we were going to dinner at that little Italian place near the pier, she asked if I'd checked what he was wearing first. I said no, and she offered casually to come over and help him pick something that photographs better. I told her he'd be fine. She shrugged, like it didn't matter to her either way. It was always like that, quiet jabs disguised as concern, passive suggestions that built up slowly. I think that was her way of making it seem like she wasn't doing anything wrong. Jordan never said anything about it. He didn't change how he spoke. He didn't stop showing up. But I could see it wearing on him. Once, after a family dinner, he asked me in the car, "Do you think they'd like me better if I wore a tie?" I told him it wasn't about the tie. He just nodded and looked out the window. The questions from my mom started around that time, too. She called one afternoon while I was at work and launched straight into it. "I was thinking," she said, "Jordan seems sweet, but what's his plan long-term?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I mean, is he thinking about finishing school, or maybe getting a different kind of job eventually?" "He's in the Navy, Mom. He manages operations for the Pacific Fleet." I know, she said quickly. I worry you'll be stuck, that's all." It wasn't concern, it was projection. My father had chased status his whole life and never caught it. I think she wanted someone to finally make it feel worth it. Jordan wasn't interested in playing that game, and that made her nervous. They started forgetting to include him in things. At first, I thought it was just bad communication. A cousin's baby shower where my name was on the group text, but his wasn't. A dinner reservation with just enough seats for everyone else. When I pointed it out, Claire said, "Oh, I figured you'd let him know. Isn't that how you two do everything?" Then she changed the subject. At Christmas, Mom sent around a secret Santa list with everyone's names. Jordan wasn't on it. I asked her about it and she said, "Oh, I thought he might be working. He's always so busy." He was. We'd already cleared his schedule. That night, after everyone went to bed, Jordan and I were in the guest room, folding up wrapping paper scraps. I could feel it sitting in the space between us. Not anger, just resignation. "They don't want me here," he said. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know what to say. He added, "It's okay, I didn't expect much." But he had expected something. Maybe not enthusiasm, but decency. I started to notice the way conversations at dinner would shift the second Jordan spoke, like they were humoring him. He'd mention a book he was reading or talk about a deployment coming up, and Claire would steer it back to something safer. "Oh, did you guys see the new James Bond?" Or, "What do you think about Monica's wedding colors?" They knew how to make someone feel invisible without ever saying it out loud. One night, we went to a charity auction hosted by one of Claire's friends. I wore a navy dress I'd had for years. Jordan wore a blazer and slacks. He looked great. Claire walked up to us, holding a champagne flute, and whispered, "Next time, tell him to lose the brown shoes. They don't photograph well under this lighting." She said it with a smile, like she was doing me a favor. Then she turned and kissed someone on both cheeks. I told Jordan in the car that she was just trying to be helpful. He didn't argue. He just turned on the radio and stared ahead. At that point, I'd started pulling back, less time at family events, fewer updates about my life. But it didn't feel like a conscious choice, more like self-preservation. Jordan never gave me an ultimatum. He never said, "It's them or me." But he didn't have to. One night we were lying in bed and he asked, "Are you embarrassed by me?" It stopped me cold. I said no, never. He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. I started to realize how deeply the small things had added up. A cousin's engagement party where Jordan wasn't invited, but her college roommate was. A photo Claire posted on Instagram, carefully cropped to exclude him, even though he was standing right next to me. A family text thread where everyone joked about high school sweethearts and college power couples, followed by a comment from Claire. Or dating guys who peaked in community college. I knew who that was aimed at. I wanted to believe things would even out. That eventually, they'd see how steady and loyal and thoughtful he was, that the labels they'd assigned to him would fade with time. But they weren't interested in knowing him. They already thought they did. And when people make up their minds, it's easier to protect the story than rewrite it. Jordan never lashed out, never got defensive. He just grew quieter around them. So did I. We started making more plans with his friends, cooking dinners at home, saying no to things we used to say yes to. Claire noticed. She started calling more, acting confused. "I feel like you're pulling away," she said. I wanted to say, "We've been sitting in the back row for months. You just never turned around." But I didn't. I told her I was busy. That wasn't a lie. Because at that point, I was starting to rethink a lot of things. What kind of love I wanted to protect, what kind of life I wanted to build, and what kind of family I was still willing to tolerate. Claire and my mother didn't realize they were running out of room. And when the line finally got crossed, they'd be shocked to find I wasn't standing on the same side anymore. We weren't planning to go. That morning, Jordan had worked a 14-hour night shift. He came home, dropped his keys on the counter, and said, "We can skip it, you know." I said we should at least make an appearance. We'd already said yes. It would only make things worse if we didn't show. He didn't argue, just nodded and went to take a shower. I laid out clothes for both of us, something simple, nothing flashy. I knew the crowd. Pastel dresses, khaki slacks, ironed shirts. Jordan came out in a navy flannel and dark jeans. He looked clean, rested, more alert than I expected after a night like that. "Should I wear something else?" he asked. "No," I said, "you look great." He kissed my forehead. "Let's go then." By the time we got to the house, the driveway was full. Claire always threw the big holidays. She liked being the host, the one with the best wine, the Pinterest-worthy appetizers, the strategically timed photo ops. We walked in through the side gate. People were already scattered across the backyard, some under the big white tent, others near the mimosa bar. Kids running, music playing low. Claire spotted us before anyone else did. She was wearing a white eyelet dress and wedge sandals, holding a glass of something pink. There was a group around her, her husband, a couple of friends from work, an aunt or two. She raised her voice just enough. "Look who finally made it," she said, smiling like it was a joke. "Did you drive the trailer up to the front door?" The group laughed, not loud, not unkind exactly, just quick, automatic. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. Jordan didn't say anything. He looked straight at her, then glanced around the group. Claire wasn't done. "Honestly, look at him," she said, louder now. "Flannel on Easter, he's nothing but a loser, trailer trash in a flannel shirt." No one stopped her, no one told her to cut it out. Not our mom, who was arranging deviled eggs on a platter nearby. Not our dad, who chuckled into his cup like he hadn't heard it properly. Not even my cousin Laura, who usually stepped in when things got awkward. They all just stood there. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Jordan turned his head slowly, scanned the backyard, then looked at me. He didn't look angry, just done. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the keys, and walked toward the front yard without a word. I followed him. We didn't speak until we reached the car. He opened the back, unzipped a small garment bag, and pulled out a crisp white uniform. "I keep a spare in case of travel," he said, laying it across the seat. "You can go back in if you want." I shook my head, "Not without you." He took a breath, nodded once, and started to change. Right there on the side of the street. I waited by the passenger door, arms crossed, staring down the driveway. It took less than 5 minutes. When he was done, he looked like someone else. Same face, same calm eyes, but there was something unmistakable about the presence he carried once that uniform was on, medals in place, shoulders squared, name tag gleaming under the sun. We walked back in without speaking. This time, heads turned for a different reason. People went quiet. A few kids stopped running. Even the music seemed lower somehow. Claire was still by the bar. Jordan walked straight toward her. "Since I've been formally introduced," he said, voice steady, "Jordan Rivers, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. Logistics Operations, Pacific Fleet Command." Her mouth parted, but no words came out. I watched her fingers tight around the stem of her glass. Jordan didn't wait for a reply. He turned to the group. "Sorry we were late. I was at work, coordinating supply routes for a humanitarian relief mission in Guam. We landed at 4. No one said anything. Claire tried to laugh. "Okay, we get it, no need to make it weird." Jordan smiled, not wide, not smug, just enough. He didn't respond. He walked over to my father, shook his hand, and said, "Nice to see you again, sir." Then he turned to my mother, nodded politely, and added, "Ma'am." The rest of the afternoon moved strangely. Conversations stayed shallow. Claire avoided us. My parents floated around, but their energy had shifted, stiff, cautious, overly polite. People kept glancing at Jordan. At his medals, at the gold stripes. Someone asked him if it was real. He just said, "Yes, ma'am, I've been serving 17 years. And that was it. Later, as we left, I heard Claire whisper something to her husband. I didn't catch the words, but the tone was tight. In the car, Jordan finally broke the silence. "You don't have to defend me to them anymore," he said. "I know," I told him. Because I'd seen it too clearly now. What they thought of me, of us, of the kind of life we'd built outside their narrow script. They weren't going to change. But I could. And I already had. That was the last family event I brought him to. Not because I was ashamed. Because I was done asking them to see him when they were committed to looking away. After that day, I stopped softening the edges, stopped playing interpreter. Claire had drawn the line. And she thought I'd stand next to her. She was wrong. We didn't speak much on the drive home. The roads were empty, late afternoon traffic hadn't picked up yet, and for the first time in weeks, the weather was clear. Sunlight poured through the windshield, warming the space between us. Jordan drove with one hand resting loosely on the wheel, his uniform jacket folded over the armrest. He looked ahead, calm. I kept waiting for the anger to surface, some sign that what had just happened had gotten under his skin, but it didn't come. When we got home, he parked, turned off the engine, and said, "I'm going to take a shower." I nodded. I watched him walk down the hallway, still quiet, still steady. And that's when it hit me, he wasn't surprised. None of it had caught him off guard. Not Claire's words, not the silence from the rest of them, not the fact that no one stepped in. He'd known, maybe not the details, maybe not exactly when it would happen, but the shape of it, the eventual rejection, the moment they'd stop pretending to tolerate him. He'd seen it coming. And I hadn't. Or maybe I had. Maybe I'd just been pretending not to. I stayed on the couch, staring at the living room rug like it held answers. The image of Claire at the mimosa bar kept replaying, the look on her face when she said those words out loud, not embarrassed, not uncertain, confident, proud. And the way the others reacted, how easy it was for them to laugh, how no one had even shifted uncomfortably. My own mother had stood there with her hands in a mixing bowl and said nothing. I kept thinking about every single time I defended them to Jordan. "They're not bad people," ID said once, after my mom made a comment about his truck. They just don't know better. They didn't mean it that way. I'd told him after Claire asked if he'd ever had a real job. They'll come around, I promised, more than once. I'd said all those things like I was helping, like I was keeping the peace. But what I was really doing was keeping the door open for them, not for him. And that felt like a betrayal of its own. An hour later, Jordan came out in sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair damp. He sat beside me and handed me a glass of water. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, then shook my head. I should have stopped it earlier. He didn't respond. Not with words anyway, just put his hand over mine and held it there. That night, we ordered takeout, watched a documentary on coral reefs, pretended briefly that it was a regular Sunday night. But something had shifted, not between us, but around us. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from Claire and a long text. "I was just joking, you're being dramatic, I didn't mean it like that." I didn't reply. By lunchtime, she'd followed up with, "Mom says you're upset, can we talk?" I turned off my phone. It stayed off for the rest of the day. I needed space. Not to decide what to do, I already knew. I needed time to face the fact that it wasn't just Claire. It was all of them. Every family gathering I'd attended without Jordan because he was too busy. Every comment left unchallenged. Every invitation where his name was mysteriously missing. I kept thinking back to the day I paid off Claire's credit card bill. She just moved in with her fiancé, overwhelmed by wedding expenses, and called me crying. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money the same day. She never paid me back. Never mentioned it again. At the time, I didn't care. I thought that's what family did. But now I could see the pattern. I gave, they took. I softened, they pushed harder. I played small so they could feel big. And the second I brought someone into my life who wouldn't bend the same way, they rejected him outright. Not because of who he was, but because he didn't fit their version of us. And because I didn't stop them. That was the part I kept circling back to. I'd spent so much time trying to make everyone comfortable that I didn't notice how uncomfortable I had become. How tired I was of shrinking myself into the space they allowed. Later that week, my dad called. He started with small talk, asked how work was if Jordan was traveling. Then he said, "Your sister's upset." I didn't say anything. "She says you embarrassed her," he added. I laughed once. "Are you laughing?" he asked. I said she embarrassed herself. There was a long pause. "You know she didn't mean anything by it," he said. "You know how she is." "I do," I said. "That's the problem." Another pause. "You're really going to cut us off over a joke?" "No," I said. "I'm going to cut you off over a decade of jokes." That was the last time we spoke that month. I didn't block anyone. I didn't make a big announcement. I just stopped responding. I stopped showing up. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was breathing air that hadn't been filtered through someone else's expectations. Jordan didn't ask what I planned to do next. He just kept being exactly who he was, steadfast, respectful, quietly proud. One night, I found him cleaning his uniform, inspecting the buttons. I watched him for a minute, then asked, "Did you always carry that with you?" He looked up. Sometimes, you never know when someone needs a reminder. I thought about that. Maybe that's what had happened. He'd reminded them of something they didn't want to face, that their assumptions weren't facts, that their version of success wasn't universal, and that their opinions didn't carry as much weight as they thought. After that night, I stopped making room for them. I stopped explaining myself. And I started thinking about what it would look like to build something from scratch, on our terms. No more waiting for approval that was never going to come. No more tolerating cruelty dressed as tradition. They'd shown me exactly who they were. Now it was my turn to show them who I'd become. The group chat kept buzzing. First, it was a photo of the leftover quiche from Easter, with a caption from my aunt about next year's version being less dry. Then someone dropped a picture of the grandkids hunting eggs. My mom sent a blurry shot of the mimosa bar. No mention of what had happened. No one acknowledged the fact that one of the most humiliating moments of my adult life had taken place less than 24 hours earlier. I muted the thread, then I deleted it. Claire texted me later that evening. "I didn't mean it like that," she wrote. "You're overreacting." No apology, just deflection. I stared at the message for a full minute before turning off my phone again. The next few days were quiet. Jordan went back to work. I dove into a project I'd been putting off, some freelance editing for a nonprofit. Anything to keep my mind from wandering back to that backyard. On Friday, my parents called. First my mom, then my dad. She left a voicemail saying they wanted to sit down, clear the air, just have a nice meal like old times. He followed up an hour later with a text. "Let's not let one misunderstanding spiral. We're still family." I read it twice. Then I replied, "Thanks for the invite, but I'm going to pass." That was it. Short, clear, no explanation. Claire sent flowers the next day, white tulips in a glass vase. The card said, "Sorry if things got out of hand." Not sorry for what she said, not sorry for how it made us feel, just sorry if. I put the flowers on the back porch and let them wilt. 2 nights later, she called me. I almost didn't answer, but I was tired of avoiding it. Her voice broke almost immediately. "I didn't know he was in the military," she said. "If I had known, I never would have said those things." I let the silence stretch. She kept talking. "I thought he was just, I don't know, some guy you met at a hardware store or something." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't care to ask." She didn't respond right away. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said eventually. "You meant enough to say it in front of everyone." She sniffed. "You're being really cold right now." "I've spent years trying to protect you from the truth," I said. "I'm done doing that." That was the end of the call. After that, I started cleaning house, digitally, socially, emotionally. I unfollowed most of my family on social media. I stopped replying to the group threads. I let birthday reminders pass without sending a message. They called it dramatic. I called it necessary. Jordan didn't ask questions. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "Don't you think that's too far?" He just watched me do what I needed to do. A few days later, my cousin Laura reached out. "I don't want to get in the middle," she wrote, "but I wanted you to know I saw what happened, and I should have said something." I appreciated that. I told her so. But I also said, silence is a choice too. She didn't argue. I could tell she understood. By the end of the week, my mother sent an email. It was long, wordy, full of justifications. She wrote about respecting tradition and misunderstandings and not wanting to create waves. She ended it with, "At the end of the day, we're still your family. We've always been here for you." I stared at that last line for a while. They'd always been there, that was true. But being there isn't the same as showing up. It's not the same as protecting someone, or backing them, or seeing them clearly. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, found Jordan rinsing dishes, and said, "I think I'm done trying." He dried his hands and looked at me. "With them?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. Just said, "Okay." And that was all I needed. We started making small changes. Stopped planning around family holidays, booked a cabin for Thanksgiving instead, skipped the 4th of July barbecue and went camping instead. Every time one of them reached out, Claire, my mom, a cousin, I'd take a breath, think about what I owed them and remind myself, boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. They're what happens when you decide your peace matters more than someone else's comfort. And the fallout. It was quieter than I expected. There were no explosions, no public fights. Just a slow unraveling. The group chat eventually stopped including me. The birthday cards stopped arriving. The Instagram likes disappeared. It was like they'd decided I was the problem, and if they ignored it long enough, it would go away. But it didn't. Because I didn't. I kept showing up for myself, for Jordan, for the life we were building together. Without apology. Without explanation. One night, about a month after Easter, I got another text from Claire. "Are we really not going to talk again?" I didn't reply. Because some things don't need an answer. They need action. And I had already taken mine. It started with a Facebook post. Claire announcing she'd been let go due to corporate restructuring. followed by a long caption about toxic work environments and how everything happens for a reason. The comments were sympathetic. Old friends, former coworkers, even some of our extended family chimed in with sad face emojis and "you got this" energy. But behind the scenes, I heard from Laura that Claire had been warned twice for missing deadlines, then caught blaming a junior employee for a mistake she'd made. She was spiraling, Laura told me over coffee. It's like she didn't think the rules applied to her. I didn't respond. There wasn't much to say. I'd watched Claire navigate life with the assumption that someone else would clean up the mess, and for a long time, that someone had been me. She lasted about 3 weeks before launching a GoFundMe. It was vague, something about being between jobs, needing to make rent, the unpredictability of the market. I stared at the link in disbelief. Claire still had the car our dad co-signed. She lived in a rent-controlled apartment. She wasn't facing eviction. She just didn't want to downsize her life. Mom called the next day. She opened with small talk, then eased into it. "Claire's going through a rough time," she said. I said nothing. She made some mistakes, sure, but you know how hard she works. She just needs a little help getting back on her feet. "No," I said. There was a pause. "I'm not asking you to give her thousands," she added, "just enough to." "No, Mom," I said again, "I'm not doing this anymore." She sighed, like I was the difficult one. "I don't know what happened between you two, but she's your sister." "I know," I said, "and she's never been held accountable for anything. That's what happened." We didn't talk much after that. Jordan and I had already been looking at new places, something closer to the base, with more light, fewer stairs. We found a 2-bedroom condo a mile from the water, clean lines, hardwood floors, a small balcony just big enough for a table and 2 chairs. We signed the papers within a week. He was promoted not long after we moved in. It wasn't a surprise. He'd been quietly rising through the ranks for years, collecting commendations and leading training programs most civilians never hear about. This time, the announcement was public, photos on the base's social page, a small write-up in the local paper. Jordan in uniform, shaking hands, a short caption about logistics leadership and strategic deployments. Claire didn't reach out. Neither did my parents. But I noticed they stopped tagging me in anything. I guess it was easier than acknowledging what they'd lost. We got engaged 6 months later. He proposed on a Thursday. No fanfare, no crowd. Just the 2 of us on that little balcony, dinner plates pushed aside, twilight settling over the water. He said, "You're the only person I've ever been certain about." I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We kept the engagement small. Told a few close friends, a couple of people from his side of the family, and a handful of my own, people who'd earned a seat. Claire wasn't on the list. Neither was my mom. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it because I was done performing closeness for people who hadn't shown up when it mattered. The engagement party was at a quiet restaurant with a private room. String lights, good food, no speeches. Afterward, one of Jordan's friends pulled me aside and said, "He's different with you, softer." I just nodded. We debuilt something they couldn't see. And I didn't need them to. In the weeks that followed, I heard secondhand that Claire was working part-time at a wellness center, posting motivational quotes online, selling protein powders and meal plans. At one point, she shared a screenshot of an email from someone declining to collaborate with her and captioned it, "Rejection is redirection." I didn't comment. Didn't like the post. Didn't feel anything at all. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. Jordan and I started planning the wedding slowly. No rush, no pressure. Just quiet decisions about what felt right. We agreed early on no huge guest list, no family politics, no second chances. We invited who we trusted. The people who'd shown up in silence. The ones who'd earned it. Claire didn't know we were engaged until someone else posted a photo. She sent me a 1-line message, "Congrats, I guess." I didn't reply. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just done trying to prove anything. Letting go wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, deliberate. And the further I got from that version of my life, the version where I bent and explained and smoothed over, the clearer everything became. They had mistaken access for relationship. They thought knowing my birthday, sending a card, showing up to a dinner once in a while was the same as being close. But I'd learned the difference. And once you learn it, it's hard to unsee. The cracks in their world kept growing. And I watched, not with satisfaction but with distance. Like someone who used to live there. But doesn't anymore. The email came in the middle of a Tuesday. Subject line, please read. I almost deleted it. I hadn't heard from Claire in weeks, not since the one-line message about the engagement. And even then, her silence had felt louder than anything she could have said. But something about the subject line gave me pause. I opened it. It wasn't short. 4 paragraphs, no emojis, no defensiveness. She said she'd been reflecting. That losing her job, watching me cut ties, and realizing she wasn't invited to something as big as my engagement had made things real. She wrote, I was jealous. I was insecure. I didn't know how to handle someone who didn't need me to be the center of everything. She didn't mention Easter by name, but she described it. I thought I was being funny, but I see now that it was. I made someone you love feel small, and I let everyone laugh. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk. I didn't want to react from a place of habit. I'd done that for years, moving quickly to reassure, to forgive, to make everything okay before the discomfort had time to teach anything. I wanted to let it sit. So I didn't respond that day. Or the next. Jordan didn't say much when I told him, just nodded and said, you'll know what to do. And I did. Eventually. 2 weeks later, I sent a short reply. Let's meet for coffee, just to talk. We chose a small place downtown, neutral territory. When I walked in, she was already seated, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes flicking up nervously when she saw me. She stood, went to hug me, I let her. It felt strange, familiar but distant, like muscle memory. We sat. She didn't start with excuses. That surprised me. Instead, she said, I didn't think you'd come. I said I almost didn't. She nodded. There was a long pause. Then she said, I don't expect anything. I want you to know I get it now, not all of it, but more than I did. I didn't say anything. She kept going. I spent years thinking I had to win at everything. Be the best, be the smartest, be the one everyone liked most. And when you brought someone into the picture who didn't play by those rules, it rattled me. I made fun of him because he didn't fit my mold, because I didn't know how to respect something I didn't understand. She looked down. And I didn't respect you either. Not really, not the way I should have. Still, I didn't jump in. I let her sit with it. Eventually, I said, this isn't about punishing you. She looked up. It's about patterns, I said, and how long they take to break. You didn't just hurt Jordan. You chipped away at me for years, assuming I'd absorb it, soften it, spin it into something harmless. And I did, until I couldn't anymore. She was quiet. I added, you don't get to skip to the end just because you finally noticed. I know, she said. I'm not asking for everything to go back. I just want a place to start. I believed her, at least enough to keep sitting there. But belief isn't the same as trust. So I told her the truth. I don't know if we'll ever get back to something that feels like closeness. I'm not saying we won't, but I can't promise that. She nodded. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said. I'm asking for space to prove I've changed. That I could live with. We talked for another 30 minutes. Light things, work, health, books. She didn't bring up the engagement. I didn't bring up the wedding. When we left, she hugged me again, quicker this time, less performative. As I walked back to the car, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time around her, calm. Not peace, not yet, but no panic. That was new. In the weeks that followed, she sent a few messages. Not often, just enough to say, I'm here, I'm trying. Sometimes I replied, sometimes I didn't. I never felt obligated. And that's how I knew things were shifting. Because for the first time in our relationship, she wasn't chasing closeness out of guilt or control. She was earning access. One quiet, consistent step at a time. Jordan asked how the coffee went. I told him it was honest. He said, "That's all you can ask for." We didn't make a plan to invite her to the wedding. Not yet. Not as a gesture. If she's there, it'll be because she showed up for the hard parts, not just the party. Because she accepted the version of me that doesn't shrink anymore. And I think, maybe for the first time, she's starting to see that version clearly. That was almost 2 years ago. Jordan and I are married now. The ceremony was small, 28 people, a rented house on the coast, a long wooden table under string lights, no elaborate dances, no rehearsed speeches, just people who'd earned a seat bearing witness. Claire wasn't there. Not because she hadn't asked. A few months before the wedding, she reached out again. Asked if there was any chance she could be included. Said she didn't want to make a scene, didn't expect to be front and center, she just wanted to be present. I told her I appreciated the message. And I meant it. But I also told her the truth, that the version of our relationship she was mourning never really existed. That what we had before was proximity, not closeness, obligation, not intimacy. And that this day, this moment of my life, wasn't about restaging old roles. It was about building something honest. She said she understood. She didn't push. And that silence, for once, felt like respect. The wedding was everything we needed. Simple, joyful, real. Jordan stood across from me in a tailored suit, hands steady, eyes soft. When he said his vows, he didn't promise perfection. He promised partnership. "I won't always get it right," he said, "but I'll never stop showing up." And he hasn't. After the wedding, we took a short honeymoon, rented a tiny cabin in the mountains. No signal, no inboxes, just quiet mornings, long walks, late-night card games. When we came home, I settled into a rhythm that didn't feel borrowed. I started my own business, consulting for nonprofits, helping them streamline their messaging, rewrite outdated systems, build stronger narratives. Work that felt useful, work that had weight. I hired a small team, women I trusted, women who valued clarity over ego. I stopped trying to prove myself in rooms that made me feel small. Stopped giving explanations to people who weren't listening. Stopped over-apologizing for taking up space. Claire and I still talk sometimes. It's measured, respectful, on neutral ground. We've had lunch maybe 4 times in the last year, usually at a cafe halfway between her apartment and my office. We keep it light. She'll tell me about a new freelance project or a podcast she liked. I'll mention a client or something funny Jordan said that morning. We don't talk about the past. We don't pretend we're close. But we're not pretending we're enemies either. There's something strangely freeing about that, naming the limits of a relationship and honoring them without resentment. She's still figuring her life out. Last I heard, she's working part-time for a startup and trying to launch a wellness brand. She's calmer than she used to be, a little more aware of herself, less performative. I don't know if we'll ever be close again. But I do believe she's trying. And sometimes that's enough. My parents still keep their distance. We exchange polite holiday messages. My mom sends a Christmas card with a handwritten note about her garden or the neighbor's new dog. My dad forwards me news articles he thinks I'd like. But the foundation's thin. I don't push for more. They were raised in a different framework, one where love was measured in obligation, where appearances meant more than truth. I spent years trying to decode that, trying to squeeze myself into a mold that never fit. Now, I just let them be who they are. And I don't confuse their proximity for love anymore. I've learned something else about loyalty. I used to think it meant silence. Biting your tongue, making peace, choosing the family narrative over your own discomfort. But that's not loyalty, that's self-abandonment. Real loyalty starts with protecting your own dignity. It starts with refusing to let people shrink you just because they're used to it. It starts with walking out when the room goes quiet and walking back in only when you're ready to be seen fully. Not explained. Not edited. Seen. Claire saw that version of me once, after everything, and I think it startled her. Not because I was angry, but because I was. I didn't need revenge. Didn't need a public apology. Didn't need to be louder. I just needed to stand there, quietly whole. That's the thing about power, it's not always loud. Sometimes it's choosing your table, setting your own place, and not flinching when someone realizes they're not invited this time. These days, Jordan and I spend a lot of time in the in-between spaces. Early mornings before the base gets busy, late dinners on the balcony, weekend errands that stretch into whole afternoons. We talk about the future, where we might live next, what kind of life we want 10 years down the line. The wedding photos hang in a small hallway near our bedroom. Not big, not framed in gold. Just enough to remind me what it looks like to be surrounded by people who show up. Fully. Without ego. Without expectation. And when I think back to the version of myself who kept showing up for people who wouldn't do the same, I don't feel ashamed. I feel grateful. Because she brought me here. But I don't live in that version anymore. Now I know better. And knowing better means doing better. So if Claire ever does rebuild something real, earn her way back, little by little, I'll be open to that. Not to the past. To whatever truth we can build from here. But if she doesn't, I'm okay with that too. Because my life isn't waiting on anyone else's growth. It's already in motion. Already full. And finally mine. Thanks for listening to my story. Have you ever had to cut ties with someone in your own family? How did you know it was time? And if someone ever made your partner feel small, what would you do? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone. And if you've ever had to choose peace over family, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your story matters too.